At first, life after the wedding looked normal from the outside. We moved into a quiet apartment near the edge of the city. Grant kept everything organized and structured. He liked routines. Every bill, every expense, every small detail of the house was carefully tracked by him. In the beginning, I thought he was just responsible. I told myself that having a husband who understood money was a good thing. After years of managing life alone, it even felt comforting. But slowly, the atmosphere inside our home started to change. Grant began talking about money in a strange way. Whenever I needed something for the house, he would pause and calculate the cost before agreeing. Sometimes he would stare at the receipt longer than necessary, as if he were measuring something. One evening I bought groceries and a small lamp for the living room. When he saw the receipt, he gave a quiet laugh. "Careful," he said. "At this rate, you'll drain the investment faster than expected." I looked at him, confused. I asked him what he meant, but he just waved his hand and said it was a joke. His tone sounded light, but something about the words felt wrong. After that, similar comments kept appearing. If I ordered dinner one night, he would smile and say, "There goes another piece of the budget." If I talked about decorating the apartment, he would say, "Let's not forget the numbers." At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe he was stressed about work. Grant worked long hours, and finance jobs could be demanding. But the way he looked at me sometimes made me uncomfortable. It was not the look of a husband thinking about his partner. It was the look of someone calculating value. Still, I pushed the thought away. I kept believing that our marriage simply needed time to settle. I convinced myself that if I stayed patient and supportive, things would improve. What I didn't realize was that those small comments were only the beginning. Soon, the truth behind them would become impossible to ignore. Before we got married, Grant always presented himself as a calm and reliable man. He spoke about the future with confidence. Whenever we talked about life plans, he sounded certain about everything: where we would live, how we would manage money, and how stable our life would be. At that time, his confidence felt reassuring. During our engagement, he often talked about responsibility. He said a strong marriage needed structure and planning. I agreed with him. After experiencing difficult years on my own, stability sounded like exactly what I needed. Our wedding was simple and quiet. Only a few close friends attended. Grant handled most of the arrangements and made sure everything ran smoothly. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was to marry someone so organized and dependable. In the first weeks after the honeymoon, Grant started setting new routines inside the house. He created a system for bills, groceries, and daily expenses. He kept detailed lists and spreadsheets for everything. At first, I thought he was simply being careful. But soon I noticed something strange. Grant didn't just want to manage finances, he wanted complete control over them. He asked me to give him every receipt after shopping. Even small purchases had to be recorded. If I forgot a receipt, he would question me about what I spent and why. One afternoon I mentioned buying new curtains for the bedroom. The old ones were faded and thin. Instead of discussing it normally, Grant immediately started calculating the cost out loud. Then he told me it was unnecessary. He explained that he already had a system for household spending and that unexpected purchases disrupted his plan. His tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. It felt like I needed permission to make normal decisions in my own home. When I tried to handle something on my own, Grant would remind me that he understood finances better than I did. He said I should appreciate that he was taking care of everything. At first, I stayed quiet. But deep down, something about the situation didn't feel like a partnership anymore. One night, Grant was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. Papers were spread in front of him, and he was reviewing the monthly expenses again. This had become a regular habit for him. He always checked every number carefully. I was standing in the kitchen making tea when he suddenly laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a short one. Then he said something that made me pause. "Well, at least I'm getting my money's worth." I turned and looked at him, confused. The sentence didn't make sense to me. I asked him what he meant. Grant looked up from the papers and gave a quick smile. He said it was nothing, just a joke about managing expenses. Then he went back to typing on his laptop like the conversation was over. But his answer didn't feel right. I kept thinking about the way he said it. The words sounded casual, but they didn't sound like a normal joke between a husband and wife. For the next few days, that sentence stayed in the back of my mind. I tried to ignore it, but something about it felt strange. A few days later, something else happened. Grant was in his office room talking on the phone. The door was slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice carried into the hallway while I walked past. At first I heard him talking about numbers and payments. That wasn't unusual for him. But then he said something that made me stop walking. Yeah, the arrangement is working perfectly. There was a short pause while the other person spoke. Then Grant continued. 50 grand up front, and the monthly costs are manageable. For a moment I couldn't move. My mind kept repeating those words. Arrangement. 50,000. Monthly costs. The tone in his voice wasn't joking. It sounded calm and businesslike, like he was discussing an investment or a deal. I quietly stepped away from the hallway before he finished the call. But the feeling in my chest had already changed. For the first time, I started to wonder if our marriage meant something completely different to him. A few weeks passed after the phone call I overheard. I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood what Grant said. Maybe it was about work. Maybe the numbers had nothing to do with our life. But the uneasy feeling never went away. One afternoon Grant left early for a meeting. Before leaving, he asked if I could tidy up his office because some papers were scattered on the desk. It sounded like a normal request, so I agreed. His office was always very organized. Most documents were placed in neat folders inside a large cabinet next to the desk. I started by stacking loose papers and putting them back where they belonged. While arranging the folders, one label caught my attention. It read Investment Agreements. Normally I would not look into his work files, but something about that label made me pause. Grant had always been very secretive about certain documents. And after hearing that strange phone conversation, my curiosity had grown stronger. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were several printed pages, financial summaries, and transfer records. Most of them looked like normal investment documents. I flipped through them carefully, trying to understand what they were about. Then one paper stopped me. At the top of the page was a bank transfer confirmation. The amount written there immediately caught my eye. $50,000. My eyes moved to the date. It was the exact week of our wedding. My heartbeat started to speed up as I read the rest of the document. Near the bottom, there was a short note written beside the transfer description. Just a few simple words. Marriage arrangement, settlement. For a moment I couldn't breathe properly. My hands began to shake while holding the paper. I read the sentence again and again, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the words did not change. That transfer was connected to our wedding. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a loan. It looked like a payment. A cold realization slowly formed in my mind. Grant hadn't married me because he loved me. Someone had paid him to do it. That evening I waited for Grant to come home. The paper I found was still sitting on the dining table in front of me. I had read it so many times that the numbers and words were burned into my mind. When Grant walked through the door, he looked relaxed like it was a normal day. He placed his keys on the counter and asked what was for dinner. I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the document across the table toward him. He looked down at the paper, then back at me. For a moment he stayed silent. I expected him to look shocked or nervous. I thought he might try to deny it. But he didn't. Grant simply sighed, like someone who was tired of explaining something simple. He pulled out a chair and sat down calmly. Then he leaned back and looked at me. "You found that earlier than I expected," he said. His voice sounded casual, almost bored. I asked him to explain what the document meant. My hands were shaking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Grant rubbed his forehead and spoke like he was describing a basic business deal. He told me that my uncle had approached him before we got married. According to him, my uncle was worried about my future and wanted someone responsible to marry me. Grant said my uncle offered him $50,000 to make sure I had a stable life. He accepted the offer. Just like that. No hesitation. No shame. He said it was a practical decision. In his mind, it solved a problem for everyone involved. I stared at him, waiting for him to say something that would make it sound less cruel. But he only shrugged. Then he laughed quietly. Grant said that marriage was expensive, and at least this arrangement made financial sense. He even joked that taking care of the household each month was like managing a long-term investment. Those words hit harder than anything else. In that moment, something inside me collapsed. Everything I believed about our marriage suddenly felt meaningless. The promises. The trust. The life I thought we were building together. To Grant, it had never been about love. It was just a transaction. After that night, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. The truth had been spoken out loud, and nothing felt the same anymore. I stopped looking at Grant the way I once had. The image of a husband who cared about me was gone. Instead, I began seeing him as someone very different. It was like living with a stranger whose real personality had finally appeared. Grant, on the other hand, seemed strangely comfortable after the truth came out. He no longer bothered pretending that our marriage was built on love. In fact, he started acting even more confident. Sometimes he spoke about the arrangement as if it were something completely normal. If we discussed household responsibilities, he would remind me that he had already done his part. According to him, agreeing to the marriage had been his biggest contribution. His tone carried a sense of superiority that had not been so obvious before. Small conversations often turned into reminders of the deal he believed existed between us. If I suggested changing something in the house, he would mention how much things cost. If I needed something practical, he would compare it to the amount he said had already been spent. It felt like every decision was being measured against that number. Instead of being treated like a partner, I felt like a cost that had to be managed. But something unexpected started happening inside me. At first, I felt anger and humiliation. Those emotions were strong, but they slowly began to settle. The shock was fading, and my mind was becoming clearer. I began paying close attention to Grant's behavior. I noticed the way he talked about money, the way he handled paperwork, and the way he spoke when he believed he was completely in control. The more I observed him, the more I understood how confident he was in his position. Grant believed the situation was completely secure. In his mind, I was someone who had no real options. He assumed that I would simply accept the situation and continue living quietly. But while he kept speaking and acting the same way every day, my thoughts were changing. I stopped reacting emotionally. Instead, I started thinking carefully about what to do next. After I decided to stay calm and think carefully, I started focusing on my own independence. I understood that reacting with anger would not help me. What I needed was control over my own future. The first step was rebuilding my ability to support myself. I began searching for small freelance jobs that I could do from home. At the beginning, the work was simple, mostly writing and administrative tasks for small companies. The pay was not huge, but it gave me something important. It gave me my own money. I opened a private bank account that Grant did not know about. Every payment I received went directly into that account. Slowly, the balance began to grow. It wasn't a large amount, but it represented freedom. At the same time, I started paying closer attention to everything Grant said and did. Whenever he made sarcastic remarks about money, I remembered the exact words. When he spoke about the arrangement or reminded me about the supposed deal, I wrote it down later. Some days his comments were subtle. Other days they were much more direct. There were moments when he spoke about the situation with such confidence that it almost sounded like he was proud of it. He truly believed that he had solved a problem with a smart financial decision. Grant never noticed the quiet changes happening around him. He still lived his daily life exactly the same way. He left for work every morning, returned in the evening, and continued managing everything as if he controlled the entire situation. His attitude remained calm and comfortable. In his mind, I was someone who depended on him completely. He believed I had no real ability to leave and start over. Because of that belief, he never questioned what I was doing. He never asked about my time during the day. He never looked closely at my activities. That confidence made my preparation easier. Day by day, I continued saving money and collecting information. Grant thought the situation would stay exactly the way it was. But quietly, step by step, I was building something he would never expect. Several months passed, and during that time Grant became very focused on a new project at work. I noticed the change in his routine almost immediately. He spent longer hours in his office, took more business calls, and talked often about an upcoming deal. One evening during dinner, he mentioned that he was close to securing a large investment partnership. According to him, it would be one of the biggest deals of his career. The way he spoke about it showed how important it was to him. He explained that the investors involved were extremely careful about who they worked with. They wanted partners who appeared responsible, trustworthy, and professional in every part of their lives. Grant seemed confident that he fit that image perfectly. As I listened to him talk, something slowly became clear to me. His reputation was a major part of that deal. The investors believed they were working with someone honest and dependable. They trusted that his personal life reflected the same values he showed in business. But I knew the truth behind that image. Our marriage was built on a secret financial arrangement. Grant himself had openly described it as a transaction. If the people he was working with discovered that information, it would seriously damage the reputation he depended on. For the first time, I understood that I had something powerful in my hands. Still, I didn't act immediately. Instead, I stayed patient and continued preparing carefully. I gathered every document connected to the payment I had discovered earlier. I made copies of the transfer record and the notes that described the arrangement. I also kept messages and written statements where Grant had spoken about our marriage like a business deal. Everything was organized and stored safely. Grant never realized what I was doing. He continued believing that he controlled every part of our situation. His attention was completely focused on impressing his future investors and completing the deal successfully. But while he was concentrating on his plans, the balance of power between us was slowly changing. For the first time since our wedding, the situation was no longer entirely in his control. The evening before Grant was supposed to finalize his deal, the house was unusually quiet. He had spent most of the day preparing documents and taking calls. I could see that he was focused and confident. To him, everything was going exactly as planned. When he finally came home, he looked satisfied. He placed his briefcase on the chair and poured himself a drink before sitting down at the dining table. I was already there waiting. The table was clear except for a thin stack of papers in front of me. Grant noticed them but didn't seem concerned at first. He assumed it was something ordinary. When he sat down, I slowly pushed the papers across the table toward him. "Take a look," I said calmly. He picked them up casually, but the moment his eyes moved across the pages, his expression changed. The confidence on his face disappeared little by little as he recognized each document. There was the bank transfer record. There were the written notes describing the arrangement. There were also printed messages where he had talked about the marriage in his own words. Grant stayed silent while reading. The room felt completely still. When he finally looked up, his face was no longer relaxed. I spoke before he could say anything. I told him that since he always described our marriage as a financial agreement, I was ready to treat it the same way. If it was truly a deal, then it could also be renegotiated. Then I explained my terms. I wanted a divorce settlement that was far greater than the original amount he had received. The payment had to be enough for me to leave and rebuild my life properly. Otherwise, the documents in front of him would not stay private. I reminded him how important his reputation was to the investors he was working with. They trusted his integrity, and that trust was the foundation of his entire deal. If they discovered the truth behind our marriage, everything he had been building could collapse. For the first time since I had known him, Grant looked genuinely afraid. In the days after our confrontation, everything changed. Grant was quiet and tense. He knew the documents in my hands gave me control he had never expected. For the first time, he realized that his confidence had been misplaced. He agreed to the divorce without argument. The settlement he offered was far larger than the $50,000 he had received before. Legally, it protected me, and financially, it gave me the freedom I had been quietly building toward for months. But even as I accepted the settlement, I knew it wasn't about the money. What mattered most was my dignity. The ability to walk away from a marriage that had been built on a lie was worth far more than any sum. I finally felt the relief of taking back control over my life and decisions, without depending on someone who had treated me as a transaction. I decided to leave the city we had shared. I packed my things and moved somewhere new, a place where no one knew me, a place where I could start over without reminders of betrayal. The apartment was smaller than our old home, but it felt like a palace because it belonged entirely to me. I began to rebuild my life, step by step. I continued working in my freelance jobs, slowly expanding my career. I decorated my new space the way I wanted, bought things I loved, and made decisions freely without anyone measuring their value in money. Each day, I felt lighter, stronger, and more confident in my own power. I realized something important. Grant had believed he could purchase my future for a fixed amount. But no sum of money could ever truly own a person. My independence, my choices, and my sense of self-worth could never be bought or sold. In that moment, I understood that the best revenge doesn't always come from punishment or exposing someone. Sometimes, it comes from reclaiming your freedom, your peace, and your life. Walking away from betrayal with strength and clarity was the victory I had been waiting for all along. Finally, I felt the full weight of freedom, and it was more powerful than I could have imagined.